So we can go ahead and get started. Um, so a little bit about me. This stuff is a little bit boring. So you're all obligated to look at pictures of my newborn while I share this. So I went to PT school in Memphis at University of Tennessee. I was there for 3 years. And then I was in Boston for 2 doing an orthopedic certified specialty residency. So I'm in no way a certified neurospecialist. I am a lifelong learner to this field. And Boston is where I really took off loving and having a passion, not only for the ortho that I do, but for balance and dipping my toe into the more neuro field of physical therapy. My desk was right next to esteemed colleagues who lectured at different uh, presentations and lots of different events, and they're all great in their field in neuro populations. So I started with Parkinson's. I have a lot of family members who have Parkinson's, and a lot of this balance and coordination affects them as well. So slowly over time, my wife and I moved to BV about 3 years ago. She is originally from BV, so that's how we got back here. And being in a rural clinic, you kind of see everything. So I had treated a few people with MS, but my first few people, or I had a couple of patients show up in our doors, and I had to start learning pretty quick. So I've done a lot of continuing ed in the area of MS, but specifically with balance, coordination, I've been working in that field for quite some time. And it is a big passion of mine because I love when people come in the clinic and I say, I need you to do this. And they say, you want me to do what? And I say, yeah, you're going to do this, and we're gonna nail that today. And every time I love seeing the expression on people's face when they finally can like take that next step with balance. So that's kind of my background into this. So I am going to start with just a little bit of background, just so we're all on the same page. I know most everybody knows most of this stuff, so I don't want to bog anybody down. This is by no means an in-depth review of MS. It's just a quick basic overview. And I should go ahead and do a plug. When I was putting this together, there was Kelsey and Alyssa put a great presentation together on the Rocky Mountain MS Center for a webinar in the past. So that is on Rocky Mountain MS Center's website if you want to go to that, especially anyone who's new to this. That was a great resource for me as I was prepping this. I watched the whole lecture and they did a great job, and there's a ton of great information on that website for anyone who is new to that. So there's about 1 million people in the US who live with MS. MS is a chronic neurodegenerative and inflammatory disease. And it affects essentially 2 big systems. So it starts out in the immune system and then spreads to attacking the central nervous system. The central nervous system comprises of the brain stem, the spinal cord, the optic nerve, and other tracts along the way. But MS can affect any parts of these, which we'll go into detail here in a second. So essentially, you have an onset episode, like a virus or otherwise. Your body has an autoimmune response. The immune system kind of gets confused. It creates antibodies to start attacking this onset, and in the process starts attacking the central nervous system, and specifically the myelin sheath in that nervous system. So if you see the picture there on the left, those what looks like the funnel in the middle, that is the myelin surrounding the nerve, and that helps nervous pathways from the brain to the body and vice versa travel quickly like an interstate. And so when you have the body's immune system attacking the cells, it looks a little bit like the representation on the right in that picture. which is from the inflammation that attacks that myelin sheath around the nerve. And then that leads to lesions, that leads to scarring. A lot of these lesions can heal and improve, but as the scarring takes place, they start to degenerate. That's more like instead of that highway, signals are on a back county road. They go a lot slower, they don't go as quickly, and things start to go downhill from there. So it just slows the nerve's impulses to the muscles, um, and then leading to scarring and damage in those areas. So that being said, in the previous slide, when I said the central nervous system involves the brain, brain stem, spinal cord, optic nerve, um, any one of those areas can be attacked. And depending on where the most scarring and lesions are occurring is how people's multiple sclerosis symptoms will start to occur. That's why you might see people who have one side affected more than another, or lower body affected more than upper body. The eyes are often affected because of the optic nerve in the brain that goes to the eyes. So that's why everyone presents differently. So a lot of the symptoms of MS are listed here on this page. I'm sure a lot of you know way more about these than I do personally. The I did want to clarify some of the symptoms, the ones that I have an asterisk beside. So the fatigue, this can be a fatigue in terms of feeling tired, absolutely. With MS, we talk about fatigability of a muscle. And so the muscle just can't go as long or as strong. So you start to walk and you start real well, and then that muscle can kind of peter out as we go. So I'm going to be using those interchangeably in this lecture because um, it's the same. You'll read the same word in a lot of instances, and it can mean different things. And I know this time of year, some of you guys said heat sensitivity can make all these symptoms much worse. So being cold is actually a good thing. That's actually very true in terms of rehab and PT as well. Um, a lot of the clinics that have the means, cooling vests or any kind of cool environment is a great place to be exercising. And then I will be talking about a little bit about spasticity. So spasticity, the definition is a disruption in the muscle movement pattern that can cause certain muscles to contract all at once when you try to move or when you're at rest. So that's kind of what spasticity is. It is that chronic tightening of a muscle or shortening of a muscle, and it can be at rest, but when you start to do motion, that's when that spasticity can kind of kick in. So when we start to talk about coordination, spasticity is a huge barrier to some of that coordination. Um, so with the spasticity, you can also have that as like you might know people who have had a stroke or a spinal cord injury. Any damage to the brain can also cause that spasticity. So we treat it a lot of the same way in terms of trying to stretch and work on that coordination. Medications is a great way to start treating spasticity. They have a lot of great medication out there outside of just stretching. I am by no means a medical expert, and I would not pretend to be. So I would definitely consult your doctor if tightness or spasticity is something that you deal with, because there's lots of different options out there, and it can help rehab improve. And then with the vision disturbance, that is from that optic nerve being affected, and that can look differently in terms of like poor peripheral vision or tunnel vision. So that can affect everyone differently as well. And with all these symptoms, they can vary by day, they can vary by time of day, they can vary by the activity you're doing, the temperature. So not only can you have all these symptoms, but they can ebb and flow throughout a day or a week, which can make balance, coordination, and living with that challenging. So there's a couple of symptoms that you might have not seen on there, muscle weakness being one, and then poor balance, gait, and coordination kind of in another bucket. And so these areas in the brain um, with muscle weakness, so I'm going to explain the corticospinal tract. It is what allows voluntary movement. So you think to pick up that glass of water, it is the corticospinal tract that goes from the brain down to the body to let you know that you need to do that. And the brain, just for a little background, the left side of the brain will affect the right side of the body for this movement, and the right side of the brain will affect the left side of the body for that movement. So I'm just trying to kind of paint a little bit more picture of how your symptoms and how it presents, MS presents with you, just so we know kind of like what we're dealing with. So your brain tells your body to move and it goes down those tracks. And if there's any inhibition from scarring or the heat or anything like that, it causes it to be slowed. On the flip side of that, this tract also works from the body to the brain. So your senses, like feeling where you're at in space, that also is affected from the body back to the brain. And any disruption along that path we can have issues. So that's why like balance and coordination is not the same for everybody, depending on what you're dealing with. So we have it down from the brain to the body, and then the body's response and what it's feeling back to the brain to kind of tell it how to react. And then the other part of the brain, the balance with balance, gait, and coordination is actually the cerebellum. And it lives, if you can see my mouse, I'm not sure, but it lives kind of in this this uncolored area. It is what helps control and coordinate that movement, so that the brain and the corticospinal tract creates it, and the cerebellum coordinates it. It causes it to be smooth and flow well. It also helps maintain upright balance and posture. And then there's a word we throw around in PT called proprioception, and that is like where your like limb is in space. So it knows my hand is in front of me, and now it knows it's behind me. The cerebellum does that. And if the cerebellum's affected, coordination and balance can be quite challenging. And we'll talk about ways that coordination can be, you can see that in daily life. So all of that being said, that's a lot of symptoms. That's a lot of different brain areas. There's a very common phrase thrown around in this community that if you've met one person with MS, you've met one person with MS. Everyone is different. So yes, this lecture is going to show some exercises, but it's not a one size fits all. I treat a lot of people in our clinic who have MS, and a lot of times we will do all the same exercise, but everyone will be doing it differently. Just depends on how it's affecting you. And then I also want to talk about just a quick primary deficits versus secondary deficits. So primary deficits meaning what happens with MS. So that is like the spasticity being affected because of the damage to the myelin sheaths in the brain. Secondary effects, that's what we're going to be hitting on today, and that's what all of us can be working on. So everyone has primary deficits. The secondary deficits happen when you're worried about your balance or it's concerning to you, so you sit more, and then hip flexors are tighter, and then your calf is tighter, or your balance does go downhill. When you sit more, your inner ear doesn't get as worked. And so these secondary deficits is where we're going to be spending time. This is where we can take complete control. And you have a lot of control over this. I've seen a lot of people make huge gains by focusing on these like secondary deficits. And that helps you like take the ownership back of some of these challenges. So I'd like to start with balance. So when I say balance, most people think of it as this blanket overarching, I have bad balance. But I ask the question, like, what does that really mean? Um, so your balance is made up of these three systems. So it's proprioceptive, which comes from the muscles. It comes from that sensation of body back to brain. It's visual, so it comes from the eyes, and it's your inner ear. So that's vestibular. If any three of those systems are affected, balance can be thrown off. Okay. And we talked about having visual issues because of the optic nerve, the corticospinal tract, and all that. Um, it's very easy for any one of these systems to be thrown off. So, what they do is they send sensory information that your body's gathering back to the brain, and it interprets those signals and tries to correct the reaction. And if it can't do that, then that's where we have difficulties. Um, I mentioned the cerebral cortex here. That's just the area of the brain that controls movement. It also controls things you've learned. So you're walking, 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 and then you're walking on ice, you change how you walk. And the cerebral cortex is what does that. You're walking and you're hiking on an uneven grade or a challenging hike. Your body's going to adapt how it walks, and you've learned that. So if these areas of the brain can store that memory of walking on ice, of hiking, we can pull that out and improve balance just by working on things. We can relearn some of those activities that we might have stopped doing over the years because we have either had a fall or we've become nervous or we're having to use an assistive device. Doesn't mean those things can't be relearned. And that's where that secondary deficit comes into play. So if you have any issues with these three systems, you can have what leads to the worst F word in a physical therapist ears is falls. So this is one of the most common sources of morbidity and mortality with MS. That's not just true of MS, that's true of anybody who falls. Falls can send people into a spiral that causes a more sedentary lifestyle, and anything anyone deals with can be kind of spiraled from there. So that is my number one job, is to try to prevent falls. Um, when we fall and with balance, we have these systems of stability that I want to talk about. Um, so with MS, it has been shown that people who have MS live with more postural sway. So what that means is you're standing, you're talking, and you're kind of just like rocking back and forth and moving a little bit more. And that a lot of that is because of the fatigability that we talked about of those muscles. So people living with MS have a challenge to maintain that upright. So that is one area of balance and how those three systems are affected. Another area where you see decreased limits of stability, that means that you have a smaller circle of balance. So you're swaying, 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 and all of a sudden you kind of feel off and you need to adjust. People living with MS have that a smaller, if you think of like a circle around your body, that kind of shrinks. And as you get closer to the edge of that circle, you feel a little more off balance. And other people, that's also patients who have Parkinson's and lots of the other conditions I treat. Um, is that limit of stability is just smaller. And we also have an impaired response of how to adjust to what's called postural perturbations. So that means you're walking and you trip on a rock, being able to catch yourself or adjust to that. People living with MS have a harder time with that because of poor trunk control and fatigability of those muscles. So all of that is all those systems are acting whether you're thinking about it or not. Um, and so we talk about predicted movements. We will talk about that in a minute, but the unpredicted movement is kind of what those three buckets are talking about. And there are ways that we can improve that. Um, I mentioned ankle, hip, and stepping strategies. I use these a lot in my exercise with people. So if you are to kind of explain these, if you are standing and you're feeling a little bit off, everybody moves, everybody sways, and your ankle is what comes in first to control that sway. If we have decreased sensation in the feet, decreased sensation in the ankles, if anything is impaired there, that becomes more challenging. And then when you've kind of felt off balance and you kind of like have to like catch or you kind of feel yourself drop, that's a hip strategy. And that is your body automatically trying to keep you upright. So if ankle fails, then it goes into hip. If the perturbation or the trip or anything like that is so big that it blows past ankle and hip, that's where stepping comes into play. So building off of those three strategies is where I actually build a lot of my rehab and working on balance. I start at the ankle, we work on the hip, and ultimately we're to where at the point where I'm trying to hold someone up and we're doing a trust fall where I let go and they have to learn to step and catch themselves with that balance. And I do that every day with people, and it is very achievable. It sounds very scary. Every time I explain it, I say, hey, this is going to be really scary. You're not going to want to do this, but we're going to fight and we're going to try to get this. And through a few weeks, we can improve a lot of that, which can improve a lot of this postural sway, the limits of stability, and the poor trunk control. So those are the three areas that I kind of work on: ankle, hip to stepping as I'm building a program for people. And so to just kind of reiterate with fatigue and balance, so we have worse postural control and balance, leads to decreased confidence, and that leads to less physical activity. So the less confident you are, the less you're going to challenge that balance system. We know living with MS, fatigue, meaning tired, and fatigability of muscle leads to worse postural control and overall balance. So this is a negative feedback loop that if you already have worse balance and you're already less active, fatigue can just make that worse and lead to even worsening postural control and balance. And it's our job to bust in and break up that negative feedback loop by challenging ourselves. There was actually a systematic review, so that in the physical therapy world, that's like one of the highest level of evidence that we have. That said somatosensory intervention had a positive effect on fatigue levels and as a result of sensory integration-based interventions. So that's a big mouthful for saying that just working on that sensory and the ankle and everything that I just mentioned previously in the previous slide can improve fatigue, can improve the fatigability of the muscle, so meaning it can last longer and improve all types of trunk control. And if we can do that, that is a system that can bust through that negative feedback loop. So that is a lot of the bad news in terms of living with MS. We have that fatigability, we have that worse postural control. The good news is there are very simple strategies to easily affect those systems. Remember those secondary effects that I talked about. I say this all the time in PT. It truly, balance and coordination truly is a use it or lose it. That's why I mentioned I love seeing the look on people's faces when I say, we're going to walk across this balance beam. And they say, you want me to do what? And I say, yeah, we can do this. It's going to be hard right now. But as time goes on, you will be able to do this with your eyes closed. No one ever believes me, and we prove everybody wrong. So we can definitely have an effect on these systems by working on this. So with coordination, I mentioned it is controlled by the cerebellum. You can see that in this picture in the green. It's on that bottom side of the skull. This is also where the system that affects the eyes and the optic nerve all live in this area. So that's why a lot of that, the eyes, the cerebellum, all the balance goes hand in hand. So these, I do mention these to just kind of give like the end spectrum of dysfunction with the cerebellum. So ataxia, tremors, clumsy movement, or dysmetria. So these are on the further end of the spectrum. Ataxia is poor controlled movement of, it can be the hand, the shoulder, the feet. It is just a challenge to control that movement. So it almost looks like a large tremor. And that can be affected when you're trying to move. So you're trying to walk, you're trying to reach, and ataxia can get worse. So very, very large tremor. And then with dysmetria, that is an over or undershooting of a target. So if you are reaching for something, either overshooting it or not reaching it like soon enough, those are all forms of dysfunction that happen with the cerebellum. So ways that you kind of see that in daily life. So I mentioned those are at one end of the spectrum, but what most people are living with is that challenge for reaching for a pen, or when you're taking a sip of water, like having trouble either coordinating it to your mouth or not being at your mouth or coming too quick. Same thing with placing objects down. Like I see often people will place an object down quickly and things can kind of slam. And that's where that poor control and coordination can happen. This is where spasticity greatly comes into play because if you have a muscle group that is chronically shortened or has challenges, like I see it all the time in hands and wrists, if you are in this kind of flexed position because things are tightened down, when you go to move, that can get worse and that can make coordination very challenging. So stretching and strengthening areas that are tight is very important. But with coordination, one area that we're going to talk about here in a minute is the motor planning and motor responding. This is an area that I think we can kind of have a takeaway tonight, talking about motor planning. And a lot of this will also become very important when we talk about grip strength. So again, with the coordination, it's when you cannot reach for an object or you're reaching for an object and spasticity kicks in, that can decrease quality of life, which causes you to stop doing certain movements or stop trying certain things. And that's what I want to break tonight, trying to get into that negative feedback, like break that negative feedback loop. So these are ways that I'm going to describe these and I'm going to show these later. That we can break that negative cycle with MS and coordination. So verbal communication and planning movement. When I'm working with patients, oftentimes, and some of you might relate, when you start to walk, it's almost like things get jumbled, and that's where like shorter like steps can occur, and we have a harder time getting that going and priming that pump. And when I say, okay, let's sit, let's calm, and let's talk this out, I say, put the right foot forward, and then I want you to say left and bring that forward. And starting that verbal processing out loud, just talking it, improves walking. Um, and there's lots of ways that we can do that. When I mention out of the box movement, oftentimes I see, especially with, I do this with like standing and sitting, because standing can often be a hard, everybody probably has that where you try to go and it can't happen, or you start to go and you're kind of right back down. And I have patients all the time say, I can't stand, this is a hard exercise. And I say, okay, here's what I want you to do. I want you to think outside of your body, outside of the box, and that wall way over there. I want you to put your arms out and reach for that wall. And just doing that, people stand right away. So that's an area where with walking, with reaching, with standing, that I think can have a great effect, that out of the box external cue for people. And then with coordination, we talk about, I want to briefly mention like single and multi-joint. Single joint activities, meaning like writing, so like just the wrist, versus multi-joint activities where it's like wrist, elbow, shoulder for like a reach. Single joint activities are much easier for coordination, and the more joints you start to get involved, the harder coordination can be. So I often have people start with single joint activities, just wrist curls or just wrist stretches, just lifting with like a pinch grip. And then we get the elbows in, and then we lift things away from us. So starting with that single to multi-joint. And then assistive devices, I know assistive devices really stink, and it's really tough having to live with that and need that. But I often find that an assistive device can help with that coordination and planning very well, especially as you're working on it. So some of these are hard. For instance, like using a rollator instead of walking and trying this right left motor planning, that can be challenging and we trip and we have difficulty, so it makes us not want to do that. But just adding that rollator can help take a bigger step and we can actually get a better exercise because of that. So I definitely try to get patients to the point where they don't have to have the assisted device necessarily, but typically we're always starting with an assisted device so we can get that motor learning in that muscle that we need. Um, and then if people do have cerebellar issues, if you have cerebellar issues, learning a motor task can be very hard. So I always, when people are having trouble, I say slow it down, take breaks. Let's come back to this later in our session. And because it can just take a little bit more time with that motor learning. So if you know you have cerebellar issues, that it will take time. So just cut yourself some slack and space some of that practice out or take breaks and just try to go a little bit slower with that. So with that coordination, we talked about hands and reaching and grasping. Strength is one area for anybody. We see this as there's a lot of research coming out now that is showing this as one of the objective tests to show overall morbidity and disability for anybody, period, is how strong your hands are. I think this is very linked to when you have weaker hands, you just do less. And when you do less, we start to live that sedentary lifestyle. So with MS, a lot of research and discussion is in like walking, legs, the lower body. About 66% of people that live with MS have upper limb impairments, which can decrease that functional capacity, leading to difficult like feedback loops. Um, there's a test that we give people as the expanded disability status scale, and people who score less than 6 have a strong correlation with a lower max grip strength, which can lead to dexterity issues. And like I've said, it's associated with higher levels of disability with daily living and things like that. The stronger that we can get our hands, this is linked to higher levels of living, preserved mobility and function. And there's even studies out there that show the stronger the grip strength, the better the balance. So this has an overall effect of activities of daily living and improving overall quality of life. So I really want to drive home, and this is something I think we can take away tonight. That's why I added grip strength. Um, is because I think this can help overall balance and overall function. I put this picture. This is actually, there are different devices that can work on grip strength. This one in particular is one where you grip and you spin, and there's a ball inside, like a gyroscope, and it goes faster and faster and faster, and it gets harder to control the more you have to grip that. And there's actually studies that have shown working with this ball and others like it actually improve people's overall grip strength and coordination is what they found. And then lastly, living with MS with gait. So 9 out of 10 people have some challenges with walking. I think everyone who I've worked with has some type of challenge with walking. That can be from muscle weakness, it can be from the balance deficits we've talked about, and it can be from any kind of that coordination dysfunction. So walking is a huge component of what we do in physical therapy. I put these numbers down here because I really want to ask the question like how often we're pushing ourselves with certain walking speeds. So with a slowed gait, a household walking speed, just walking in your home, is less than a mile an hour. If you are limited with your community walking, you're walking at under 2 miles an hour. If you are an unlimited community walker, have no issues, and your speed is quick and you're moving place to place, you're walking at about 2.7 miles an hour. And then the 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 biggest one that I just kind of blows my mind, when you're crossing a 4-lane road and trying to be safe with that, trying to get across while the light's green, you have to walk 3 miles an hour. And I personally, it when I'm working with people in the clinic, very often we're not walking at these speeds. Um, I don't suggest just going out tomorrow and trying to walk as fast as you can because that's where falls can happen. But getting with a physical therapist and working on ways like this here. So intermittent, this middle bullet point, intermittent or interval training can really help walking speed, which can help overall muscle strength, overall coordination. So I do think it's very important to try to push walking speed, but in the right setting with a physical therapist. So to do this, balance and coordination is a must. So we have to be working on the things we've discussed earlier. Overall strength of the hip, the knee, the foot is a must. Um, and then I put this picture of the foot because in physical therapy, one of my favorite things to work on is the foot, personally. And I love, love, love the big toe. And it's really funny, but I work on people's big toe all the time. There's a lot of data out there that shows that your strength of the big toe is one of the biggest indicators of your overall balance. So if anyone has been standing there and you feel like you're kind of lose your balance forward or you have to take that step, if we had a stronger, bigger toe, you might not have to take that step. So I love working the big toe. And I'm about to start talking about interventions that can kind of help with all that. So before I break to interventions, does anyone have any questions at all?
No,
I know that was a lot of information.
I'm good.
Okay, great.
I guess I don't really have a question, but more of an observation. When you talked before about walking assistance, canes,
Mhm,
etc.
mhm.
Um, my experience is I've needed it at times for the last several years, and I've appreciated it. But sort of like having a disability hang tag in my car, I do wonder how much I rely on them. And when you talk about trunk instability, I do feel like the increased use of I use hiking poles for walking when I'm walking in the neighborhood and out of the house. And I have noticed a correlation of increased trunk instability along with increased use of my hiking poles.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that is that double-edged sword where it is allowing you to stay active, but if it's too much reliance, it can be a little bit of a challenge. So I never advise people trying to push the envelope too much, just on your own, out of the blue, always with a care provider first, or with a partner like with you when you're about to push the envelope. Um, but I do, what I try to give people is like, let's say you're out on a walk and you're using your poles and you feel like you're having to rely on those more for bouts of that walk. Try not to rely on them as much. Like try to push your trunk and um, allow yourself that like kind of when we talked about the interval training, like a little faster walk or a little less reliance on the pole for periods of time, shorter periods of time, and not just the whole thing. I do find people say like because of a pole or because of an assisted device, like the whole walk is kind of just the overarching, I went for a walk. But even that walk, like we can break up little sections and have less reliance safely, of course. I need everyone to know safely, safely, safely. Um, but we can break up those sections to where it can push that envelope, but not so much that we end up falling or anything like that.
I have to say, I've had this disease for a long, long time. I've had these challenges for a long, long time, Garrett. I really, really appreciate what I am observing in your approach. Physical therapists and things that I've gone to in the past have just shaken their heads and just kind of thrown up their hands and said, well, this is going to be you and it's not going to get better. But you can try this, you can try that. Oh, work on your core. Um, uh, and there's never been, just in the last 15 minutes, a very comprehensive approach to say, I work on hand grip. I can't hold things in my left hand. If I have a jar jam in my hand, I can't tell it's there and it will hit the floor. The perception of where my limbs are is is way off.
Hmm.
Thing about my movement and my walking is funny. Uh, so I've had to rely on canes. I've got some ski walking poles too, Alan, and I've got a wheelchair and I've got an electric wheelchair. If I've got to go longer than a block, I will have to call an Uber to get me back home. So it's very interesting to me that we're talking about, hey, maybe this hand strength thing's got some validity to it. And big toe, I've never heard anybody talk about strength in the feet. Uh, uh, so I very much appreciate this discussion, and I'm going to save once I find this recording, I'm going to save it and look at it every week. So
Good,
thank you.
good. Well, we are about to talk about some of those exercises that I'm going to give everybody that are safe enough to do. So you can also use those and share those. But yeah, you mentioned, Dan, the hand strength and not even knowing that jar and having the people tell you in the past, like this is just kind of the way it is. The primary deficits we talk about, like certain nerve pathways are scarred, and there's not much we can do about that. But there's not one specific pathway that if it's scarred, it's never gonna be able to do this again. Like there's lots of nerve pathways to areas of hands, feet, hips, knees. And my goal as a PT is to gain the strength in everywhere we can. Um, and your goals as people living with MS is to gain the strength anywhere we can that improves all those secondary functions. Because if we kind of fall into that this is the way it is mentality, then that's where those secondary effects are less. So because that grip strength is less, now you're not reaching for this. Now you're not grabbing that jar and trying to open it. And then we pass it off to people or we ask for help where you might not necessarily have to. I know people, it can be really frustrating. A lot of my patients, and we work on this, of having people say, "Oh, here, let me help you," or being um, be, of other people thinking that you guys can't do fill in the blank, and those secondary deficits and being able to get those brings back your autonomy and your independence and shows people that you can do stuff, that you don't have to have that jar open for you, that we can try to bring in those other nerve pathways and build the muscle where we can. So that's what I'm hoping that these exercises that we're about to do can help. So talking about any of those, and we're kind of at a point where I'm going to be explaining these exercises. So if anyone has any questions or exercises of their own, just please feel free to chime in. I did start these with a little bit of the inner ear that we talked about. And so again, I've kind of said it, but I need to make another statement. Some of these, if you're doing them and your balance is really off, or things are fatigued, or you're very hot, like these can be dangerous if you're standing, dogs running around, kids running around. So I do really need everyone to be safe if we are starting these exercises. I always start people with a lot of these sitting down, so none of these should cause any safety issues, but I don't want anybody to get a wild hair and go for some of these. So um, we talked about those three systems for balance. So like feet, muscles, proprioception, the inner ear, and the eyes. So this is an area where we can start working on the eyes and inner ear. So if you have, there's lots of different ways we can do this. So I'll go ahead and just kind of show these three. So sitting down, you can use your thumb, you can use a piece of paper like these pictures are, but there's lots of ways we can work eye and inner ear. So we hold something out in front of us, you lock your eyes on it, and you just turn your head, shaking your head no, and you keep your eyes locked on that piece of paper. You can also nod your head yes, up and down, and keeping your eyes locked on that paper. Other ways, um, you can have two pieces of paper. You're standing there and you keep your head still. You move your eyes left, right, left, right, left, right. You can move these at an angle and look back and forth, trying not to move your head. So those are all great exercises for eyes, for inner ear that I give patients every day. Others are, if you keep this paper locked in front of you or your thumb locked in front of you, you can turn your head and follow that paper and then turn your head the other way. That gets everything in that room spinning. And there's muscles and receptors in the inner ear and eyes that kind of help block out some of that spinning or improve overall balance. So I would say if people deal with vertigo, some of these can make people more dizzy, nauseous, and I wouldn't push the envelope with these if you have dealt with vertigo in the past, because they can make you a little dizzy. But they are exercises that if we can slowly but surely work on them, it can improve overall inner ear and eye strength, and that helps with overall balance. And you don't have to have the papers like I mentioned, like you can use your thumb. So you can stand there and just kind of take your arm side to side, staring at your thumb. You also don't have to blow this out of the water. You don't have to do these big turns. Like you can stand here and just start very small, moving back and forth. You can start really close and just moving your eyes back and forth. You can start, instead of these big motions with your head, you can just kind of do a very small shake. So you kind of just place yourself where your abilities are. That's just a short few exercises I give for inner ear and eyes to try to build that. I always have people start sitting down, and as balance improves, if you have someone there with you, you can then move to standing safely. And then talking about some of the balance things. So in the very beginning, I mentioned brain to body. Okay. I also am very big on body to brain with that big toe and with the foot strength. So that's where this comes into play. So if you're balancing and you are able to, that you don't deal with foot pain, doing things barefoot is much, much, much better for balance because you feel that ground. Your muscles can begin to work a little more and they can give a better response back to that body. You throw on socks, throw on a bulky shoe, you're going to be kind of wobbly on a bulky shoe already. And that's not always necessarily what the body needs to work on that balance. So just standing like this with feet together, I always have people start at a counter or a sink so you can grab on if you did have any issues. Many of you have probably done this with eyes closed in the past with a physical therapist or someone, but I have people focus the feet here. So you can keep your eyes open, and I want you thinking about your feet grabbing that ground and thinking about your big toe trying to anchor you down into the ground. From there, one of my favorite exercises, I'm just trying to see my screen. One of my favorite exercises I give people, I have people get in the corner of a room, like because that's the safest. People have their feet close together, like this patient here. You grab the feet on the ground, and we just move the body in a circle, kind of like you are pivoting around your feet, like this. So it's not leaning forward and twisting. It's all coming from the feet and ankles. And it does not take much. If you remember the slide where I was talking about the smaller circle, the limits of stability, it does not take much to feel like you're off balance. It's one of my favorite exercises to give people. You can also think about a box. So you're in like the front left of the box, move, shift your weight kind of to the front right, back, and then to the side. That's a great exercise to start working on that foot and ankle, and building that strength. I always suggest doing it in a corner first, because if you do get a little off, especially going backwards, you have that corner there to catch you. So that's a great exercise for the feet, and as well as the overall body. Outside of that one, this is an exercise in PT we kind of call the Michael Jackson's.
Gary,
Yes,
can I ask a question?
please.
Back to the eye exercise interventions, something that I've noticed over the past number of years is image instability, that was new. That if I'm lying in bed, I'm looking up at the ceiling, move my eyes one side of the room to the other, the light moves as well, instead of staying stable as it's supposed to. The eye interventions, would they be potentially relevant for that kind of an issue? I think that
Yeah,
ultimately, if when I'm doing more sports activity, biking or skiing or things like that, that it does come into play where when I'm moving my head around, moving my eyes around, that the world is also moving concurrently at the same time.
yeah, for sure. I think these would be great because of what you just said. When you're moving your head around and you're kind of seeing these things, that's where the balance can feel a little off. It is challenging to tease out the eyes and the inner ear. It takes working with a professional, and even when you have, let's say, your eyes are affected, when any of those systems I mentioned, the proprioception, the eyes, the ears, if any one of them is affected, they're all affected. They all have to work a little harder. So if you notice you're standing and you close your eyes, you feel a little more off. Your inner ear and proprioception is having to work harder. So if you have an issue with the optic nerve and visual, like if things are more foggy or blurry or shadowy, working on any system can help the other systems out. Like when a physical therapist is having you stand with your eyes closed, they're trying to challenge the other systems to work a little better and a little harder, and it's an exercise for those other systems. Um, there are definitely like talking with a specialist in terms of eyes, because there's different lenses and different things that you can look at with people who are professionally able to do that with you. I would definitely say trying to cover all bases with what is available to you.
I suspect it's more of a brain processing issue. There's not an eye or optic nerve issue, but it's processing the images to maintain stability of the image while
Mhm.
your eye moves, so that you don't see you know the plant moving across the room as you look to the right, as you look to the left.
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
There's
and I
processing in the brain that takes care of that.
for sure, and that even if it's a processing issue, it is still one of those I believe use it or lose it, because if we, it is challenging living with that, and these exercises may or may not help, but if we choose to not do these exercises or to not work on it, that's where those secondary deficits come into play, and it's kind of one of those use it or lose it things for the brain, because the brain is a muscle just like anything else, and we can improve it in areas um, that are still unscarred, or areas that are still working very, very hard. So I always challenge people to like keep working on those things.
Have
Thanks.
you ever
Yeah.
heard of the Romberg test? It's like the neurological test where you sway around and
Hmm.
make sure you have balance. It's like a sense of where you are in the room.
Yes, the one this picture comes from the Romberg.
Oh, okay. All
Yep.
right, great. Good. Good.
Yep. Yeah, and a lot of the tests that I do in physical therapy, I make them into exercises. Like if we see this is hard, okay, let's do that as an exercise. So a lot of those tests can be made into exercises, and that's how I plan a lot of my exercises around that.
Okay, thank
These
you.
these look like they would be good for me and maybe Alan. Do you have the sensation that if you move your head, and it doesn't have to be real fast, but that your brain is sloshing? It's like it's like the cup of water is, and so some of these exercises, I can't
Yep.
do them very far. I've tried them here. I can do about 18 inches and
Yep.
I'm like done. But
And that's where I said, like, start where you're at. Like
yeah,
that sloshing that you feel like the inner ear sloshes, and that's kind of how you know you're upright versus sideways. Like it kind of gives you that. And if it's
oh,
having
good,
issues,
good.
it is a
I thought it was the LSD I took back in college in the 70s.
well, this is good. These are great for anyone to be working on. You mentioned the inner ear. When I have people do these, they can be like that. They can cause some vertigo if people are like living with vertigo. But when you start to live a more sedentary lifestyle, I even see this is true like with neck pain, like whiplash patients I work with, because we're not like because we turn the body to turn the head. Like if people have neck pain and they're turning the body, they're not getting that inner ear moving. And then once we start, then I'm noticing people are dizzy. So we even with like things like that, when you don't work a system, it kind of dampens. And then you go to need to work that and it's going crazy saying, whoa, I'm what's going on? Working that system can improve. So I see that all the time with the inner ear when we stop and we're sedentary and we don't turn and look, that's when we have to, things can get kind of dizzy and we can have issues. So um, that's where I have these for lots of different people to try to
Garrett,
work.
how about depth perception? Going, reaching forward and not getting whatever you're grabbing.
Great question. There are also, so I didn't list them here, but there are also exercises. And that's a great point of having trouble with something and taking these exercises and tailoring them to you with a physical therapist. With depth perception, you just have this here, you're sitting, you're staring, and you try to follow and back and follow and back. And doing things like that can, it's just a way to practice things that are difficult. There are some areas of depth perception that are challenging to improve. Like I mentioned, the dysmetria, like that is something that is there at baseline, and we have to learn to adapt with these exercises and with other systems in play, like talking through and to grab that pen or that piece of paper.
And that would affect the balance and coordination as well.
All of that, if we improve one system, all balance should start to improve and we should see areas of improvement in any of that. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. Great. So I did mention some of these balance exercises. I talked about the circle. So standing, grabbing the feet on the ground, barefoot if you can, and moving in that circle. I do also safely, again, like in front of a counter so you don't fall, but trying this lean. So I call these in my practice the Michael Jackson leans, his dance move where he's kind of like leaning way forward and coming back. If you just have hands on your hips, leaning forward and bringing it back, the feet grab that ground to try to not let you fall forward. And it's a great way to build that foot strength. If standing is challenging for you, you can still do these sitting on a couch watching TV. I have people just grab the ground, grab the ground, grab the ground repeatedly for 5 minutes straight, really trying to focus on the toe and all those foot muscles to try to build that strength. So, if standing is challenging, if you feel like you have to sit most of the day, or you're confined to a wheelchair or rollator, you can still do a lot of these exercises that we talked about, the turning, the feet grabbing the ground. And then talking about grip, you can go and look at the ball that shakes, and you can do all those things. You can also just grab a towel and work on wringing out the towel. So taking that and twisting, twisting, and twisting, and really getting that movement. If that's challenging for you, you can start with that single joint that we talked about and just squeeze, 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 or squeeze and hold, 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 and try to just hold as long as you can. Those are ways you can start to build that grip strength. Then you can move into some of the wringing of the towel. You can move the hands forward and back. You can hold this and turn and twist, and that's another way to build that grip strength. And then grip is also, sorry, that was my Siri. And also grip is not just muscles in the hand, it goes all the way up to the elbow. So if you have light weights, working on wrist extension and then turning, doing wrist flexion. If grip is something you have trouble with because of spasticity, we can take the other hand and still help like support that and try and curl or use bands around the wrist or anything like that to build all the way up the chain into the elbow. And lastly, another one, I mentioned the big toe, very important. The ankle, the dorsiflexor, so that's if you're sitting with your feet on the ground and you're lifting your toes, it's not pointing your toes, lifting your toes. That is a huge muscle with forward leaning. If you feel like you have trouble with forward leans, it's a muscle that starts to work the ankle strategy that I mentioned previously. It's the first system to start. Just sitting there and holding that up as long as you can. Try to go a minute and you'll be burning in the front of your shin, just trying to hold your feet up off the ground. You can also just pump, 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 pump. And that's another way you can start to build those muscles and not have to get off the couch. So those are all very easy exercises that we can do sitting, we can do in very safe environments that can start to build the muscles of the feet. They can start to build the muscles of the hands, and they can also start to build your circle. So as you are feeling a little more sway, you can start to try to have a little more control over that sway. That's a lot I covered. What I'm going to do is give Sophie a handout that I'm going to have her send to everybody that shows some of these pictures and has a little description and detail in them so that you can have access to some of these easier exercises to do.
Yes, absolutely. And I'll send that out. As soon as I get that from Garrett, I'm going to follow up with everybody in an email as well. And we should have the recording up for you by early Monday, but I don't want to cut Garrett off by any means. So we still have 15 more minutes.
So some of the major, we covered a lot tonight. You can definitely go back and rewatch this recording. But some of the big takeaways that I want people to leave tonight knowing that balance and coordination can be learned and improved. You have learned different, we talked about walking on the ice, hiking. Your brain had to learn how to do that. We can relearn how to do a lot of that stuff because a lot of that is secondary deficits where we just haven't been doing it. And if we just start to build that up, this can be learned and improved. You have to practice, practice, practice in every area of life. You can take days off, but you can't take weeks off. You have to use these tools. It's a very much a use it or lose it. Everyone has a primary deficit that they're living with, whether it be a spasticity, whether it be the vision and the plant moving. Those are all primary deficits that we live with. I don't want those primary deficits to keep us from doing what we can for the secondary deficits. I don't want those to lead us to sitting more, not opening the jar more, because that's what leads to secondary deficits and a decreased quality of life. We spent a little bit of time talking about the motor planning, but one thing I would love everyone to take away is that out of the box of thinking, especially with a sit to stand. I see that all the time where that sit to stand is very hard. But if just in your mind, if you just reach to that wall way beyond, I see improvements in that immediately. If for motor planning and things like that. And then lastly, I want everyone to just become more comfortable with pushing themselves. A lot of the primary and secondary deficits can make that more sedentary lifestyle. Confidence is shaken. We feel like we can't walk faster. We feel like we can't grab that jar. But safely pushing yourself is a great way to get back a lot of that independence that time and some of these primary deficits have caused us to lose. And I want everyone to know that like pushing yourself is huge, and we don't do it enough. I even talked to like that's why I put the walking speeds, because how often are we walking 3 miles an hour? Probably not a lot. And then lastly, um, get help from a PT or OT. Just tonight, I had a patient of one of our people in the BV group that does exercises. She handed me an article that she saw in a magazine, and it talked about how the delay in diagnosis of MS can last as long as 2 years. And so many people that I meet don't even know that they have the option for PT at that point. Depending on insurance, like this is where you talk with your doctor, but in every state now, there are options for direct access care to physical therapy. You can talk to your doctor and say, I want physical therapy, I want occupational therapy. And they can prescribe that for you, refer you to a PT. You don't have to wait on anyone for that. Just because we don't have a diagnosis of MS does not mean we can't work on balance, work on coordination, work on some of those deficits that that are affecting people every day. So you and loved ones and people who are just now dealing with this, like start early. You don't have to wait for a doctor to say, let me refer you to PT. You can talk to your doctor, your primary care doctor. You can talk to a PT and get help now. All those exercises, they're very baseline. I expand like crazy. I modify for people. I would give a different modification for every single one of you tonight. So working with a PT or OT who will take that step and not say this is just how it is, you're going to be better for it. The OTs are very good with helping with hand coordination. They have lots of strategies, exercises, ways of opening that jar, buttoning the shirt, things like that that are great. So my OT friends are fantastic as well, and can really help. So definitely get seen early. Don't wait on a diagnosis. Don't wait on a doctor. Like take control of that for your lifestyle and for your loved ones that might not be here tonight. So
Garrett, I've got a question.
yes.
I assume that the initial evaluation is obviously best done in person. Have you done any work with patients who live remotely from BV, doing some telehealth follow-up for improving or expanding the exercises on an ongoing basis?
Yeah, I have done telehealth in the past when I lived in Boston. I have not done any in Colorado. I found the telehealth world, it was great and it had limitations. So not being able to see what stepping strategy you're taking, or the in-person sessions always vital. There are strategies like the online exercise classes or things like that that are good. But it's an area where there's this is getting into the weeds, but there are challenges with reimbursement, insurance, and those are being challenged lately in terms of telehealth. So a lot of those services are kind of up in the air and are clinic dependent. But even with telehealth, like yes, you can work on some things, but from a safety standpoint, like there would have to be workarounds for things like that.
Just hearing people say where they're from. We're obviously all dispersed quite broadly through the mountain region here. And if there
Yeah.
aren't physical therapists in their regions that are versed in this, they might be interested in trying to connect.
Yeah, and I am always open to with like other physical therapists. You're welcome to share. Like I love hearing feedback from other physical therapists, working with other physical therapists, like talking in that residency. That is how we learned was by answering a question with a question and that communication and camaraderie. So if people work with a physical therapist, like feel free to share this. I love meeting physical therapists around Colorado and seeing what people are doing, and I think it's a great just network of people because in Colorado it's a lot rural and people might not have specific training, and unfortunately you might fall into an instance where the physical therapist might just not have that knowledge or not have that confidence to challenge your balance because they don't want you to fall. So I think a lot of that is like background, but I love working with other physical therapists as well and bouncing ideas off of people. So
Thank you.
Any other questions coming up?
I would just say that I bought a recumbent bike after I got diagnosed, and that's been great, but I know that it doesn't help my walking, and I choose to walk with the walker with my disease just because it keeps my gait as normal as possible, like it used to be. And so I ride the bike as much as possible, and I'm striving to get onto an upright bike. So that's like my next goal in life. And I mean, I'm just taking it step by step because everything changed in my world. So the recumbent bike's been very helpful for me for exercise. And I was in rehab for 2 weeks learning to rewalk, and that helped. And otherwise, I just try to stay active. That's my thing. I don't have upper body problems with MS. I have a good grip and had it tested all the time at Swedish Medical. And I just have problems from my hips down. That's my MS is all there. But everybody has MS is different. So, but I'm very happy that Alan, you ski. I'm very jealous.
Thank you. I taught skiing for a lot of years, so I have a lot of workarounds that I can use to cheat. I also was a big mountain biker forever, and I kind of got away from it just because was having issues with being able to keeping my foot on the pedal or being able to release from my clipless pedal.
Yeah.
And a lot had to do with the fatigability of my muscles. It would just be over that threshold that I could not release it with lateral movement. But I found e-mountain bikes a few years ago, and it's just an amazing game changer of being able to get myself out there. There was a movie I saw some years ago from Teton Gravity Research about this guy who had a terrible accident at the Red Bull Rampage and thought he'd never be on a bike again. He got on an e-bike, and his comment was, it was the first time since the accident that he felt like himself again.
Oh,
And
that's great.
I totally share that experience. So I don't know where everybody is in their disease and abilities, but e-bikes, it would be something I would absolutely recommend they explore. It makes you feel young, and it makes you feel normal.
yeah,
Right.
Alan, the MS community in BV, there's a huge e-bike team then, and there's a lot of group riding and things like that, the e-bikes.
Oh, I'll have to try to connect with them.
Yeah.
It's not far away.
Yeah, and Tanya, what you said, I hope everyone heard that what you said about the recumbent bike, like that's where you are, and so you're doing it and you're going for it, and you have a goal of a stationary, but
Yeah.
you're starting where you're at, and that's what I hope everyone takes from that is that you are still going, you're still pushing, and you have goals for further. But
Yeah, I just
yeah,
keep goals in mind. That's my main thing because I
yeah,
had so much damage from in my brain from the MS because it wasn't like there wasn't a question whether or not I have MS because it almost killed me. It was easy to get diagnosed and but I have had a lot, like my optic nerves recovered, so I visually can see things now. At first, I watched the end of the 23 NFL season with all the players' head cut off. So that was really interesting for a while. And then it just slowly came back from kind of working to get my visual up there and seeing the sides. But I still have not driven a car in almost 3 years, so or 2.5 years. So it's been a while. It's just I always have just little goals, and I'm like, if I can make it to that, if I can ride the bike, 200 days out of the year, that's great. So I'm staying active, but
Great.
I'm always trying to visualize like nerve connections or, little strings coming through my head because I know I have so much myelin damage from the first attack. So that's my input is visualization and a
Mhm.
positive attitude.
Yeah, thank you for that. Yeah, that can go further than people think. And this is a chronic disease, and that can be very draining. But finding ways to like e-bikes or ways to do that is great. That finding those outlets.
Well, I thank you for your time.
Yeah, thank you.
Any
Any more
last
questions?
questions, comments before we close out for tonight?
Just thank you, Garrett. This has been very motivating. There's so much that I know I can do, and I just have to practice, 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 and do it.
Yes. If you learn nothing else, I hope you're motivated.
Tanya brought up something that I would love to know. So if I really got into all these exercises and really, worked on all this stuff, are you saying that I might be able to go back to driving someday? I pictured I might be able to walk pretty good, but now you're saying that maybe driving? That would be awesome.
I make zero promises with any of this,
Yeah, I know.
especially with driving an automobile and other people around. But what I hope people gather from this is that we can achieve things that you think are challenging or you haven't done in a long time. That might not mean driving, but it can mean walking further than you have in the last 2 years, or
Okay.
going to that family event that you have been avoiding because too many people are around trying to help and things like that. So,
Yeah. Okay. Great. You got me motivated. Oh,
all right, don't get behind the wheel.
no, not yet. I'll know when I'm ready, but not yet.
Well, thank you. This was great. Very, very
Great.
much.
Yeah, and I know I rushed through a lot of the exercises. Like I said, I'm gonna create a document that's a little more detailed that you so if you can send out and you can have. And then my clinic is body mechanics physical therapy. That's where I can and be reached. That if you have questions about anything we talked about or some of those exercises need any clarifying, like please feel free to reach out. My goal is to help the community as a whole, no matter where you're at in the state or in Taos. So I love Taos, by the way. My aunt
Thank
lives
you.
there, so we go often.
Yeah, it's a beautiful town.
Yep, yep.
That's why I was jealous of Alan skiing. So, because I used to ski at one point in life, but life changes. So,
yep.
Yeah, Sophie, I do look forward to getting that paperwork. I have a PT who's not experienced with MS. She does do a lot of the exercises that you have told me about tonight.
Great.
But since Garrett, you do like to talk to PTs, I'd like to connect the two of you.
Yeah, if other PTs are open, I am. I don't want to step on any toes, but I love chatting because I love learning from other people too. So
Yeah,
you
so
can
make
never you
sure
can never be
on.
the smartest person in the room. There's always something to learn. So
So just, Sophie, if you can make sure you put that information on how to contact Garrett on there, that would be helpful.
Yep, sure will. I will be sure to.
Thank you.
Mhm.
I want to just jump in one more time. I'm sorry. Tanya, do you know, do they have an adaptive ski program at Taos?
They do, yeah, they do have adapted ski program, but I can barely, for me, I haven't really left my house because of this disease. So, because it's a lot to take it, like I'm still learning how to process like all this, like it's really chaotic. Like even my birthday, just like 3 people's good because it's just I get mentally overwhelmed still.
You,
So,
I'd still encourage you to consider contacting them. There's
thank
the
you.
Rec Outdoor Education Center here. I volunteered with them a few years ago. Had issues because of my disease that I couldn't continue, but they are absolutely amazing at getting people out with immense disabilities and to be able to experience being on snow and skiing
Yeah.
in a different way. I would wholeheartedly encourage you to at least contact them and see what.
Thank you. Yeah, I will. I have been okay with accepting this disease, that it will take me some years to process it and come to, like, my life's constantly evolving with this disease. So it's changing all the time. And I'm better than I was even 2 years. Like I was diagnosed in November of 2022. So it's been 2 years now, and I'm night and day difference because I did spend a month at Swedish hospital. So it was a long time and 2 weeks in rehab. And so I'm happy that I can walk with the rollator and a quad cane. That's been big goals for me. So maybe in like 2 years, I'll get on snow again.
The sit ski is people with complete paralysis of their lower bodies, and it's
Yeah,
amazing what they can do on the two ski sit ski. The balance is inherent in the device, but the movements with your upper body control it, and you would probably have that skiing feeling again.
that'll be great. Thank you. I appreciate the input. Well,
I'll be,
thank you so much, Garrett. I
yeah,
appreciate the time, and thank you, Sophie.
absolutely.
Yes.
Yeah, thank you for everybody's time. If you do these, exercises, seek counsel from a physical therapist, do them safely, learning them, but they're great starting points to try to work with someone to push through. So
Yeah.
thank you, everybody.
Thanks,
Thank you.
everybody.
Okay.
Have a good night.
Thank
Thank
you.
you very
Bye.
much.
Bye.
Thank you.